you never forget just how much power this thing has. You're going 40 miles an hour in fourth gear, you're not even turning 2,000 RPM, you just roll into it just a little bit. 45, 50, 55, just like that. It's accelerating. I love it. This has got the MagnaFlow performance exhaust. It's actually a fantastic exhaust. It's nice and quiet when you just want to cruise and when you want to get around town, but then when you want to go give her the beans, man, it opens up and it just sounds fantastic. My only gripe would be on the overrun. It's a bit too tinny, but that's in the tuning. That's just something that I have to change. That's not a knock on the exhaust at all. It takes a little bit to get used to shifting a 6-speed gearbox, especially if you come from a world of front-wheel drive cars. They all have cable connections to the transmission. It's not a direct linkage, and this, when you get into it for the first time, will feel heavy. It just does. It's all mechanical. It's directly connected to the gearbox, and it takes a bit to get used to it. But once you do, it feels just natural and like butter. And when you want to shift quickly, boy, you can shift quickly. And this thing has so much power, it can light up the tires in second and third. Now we'll give her a bit of stick here, see what she sounds like. Not bad, huh? That was 85 miles an hour, just like that, and that wasn't even full throttle. It's just a fun car to drive, I tell you. I came from a world where all my cars were front-wheel drive, or they were just pickup trucks. When I was growing up, I learned to drive on a 1984 F-150 with a straight 6 and 4 on the floor. So at 11 years old, I was driving stick, and it was a blast. And I learned a lot about driving and back in the cornfields, screwing around with my brother. And for 5 years, I learned to drive like that. And then I went into a world of caravans and 4-cylinder Grand Ams that were all front-wheel drive, and they had automatics. And I kind of lost my ways. It wasn't until I was about 22 or 23 that I finally got a manual transmission car again, my Z34 Aluminum, which was a great time. I love that car, but it was front-wheel drive again, so it had its limits. I mean, you couldn't give it full power in a corner and expect to come out the other side alive. And then I got my Grand Prix, which was another great car, but again, front-wheel drive, nose heavy. And this is the first rear-wheel drive performance-oriented car that I've ever owned. And it takes a bit of getting used to the power going into the rear wheels, because you're so used to a world where you turn into a corner, and if you give it too much power, it just starts to turn less. And you just take your foot off the power, and then it starts to turn around the corner again. But in something like this, when you give it too much power, the tail end comes around. Now you find yourself having to counter steer, save that turn so you don't end up in the ditch or in a tree or what have you. But at the same time, once you get the basics of it down, it's a lot of fun. This car's got some very basic options on it too, like all good cars. I hate these cars that are too complicated. You watch them on Top Gear and these other shows, these Mercedes and these BMWs, and yes, they're expensive, and yes, they're powerful, and yes, they've got a lot of toys, but they've got multiple settings for the gearbox, and you can't get a manual, and you can never turn the traction control or the anti-lock brakes completely off when you just want to drive and know your limits and know the car's limits and enjoy the entire experience. This is much more oriented. It's got one traction control button right here. Push it once, you turn the traction control off. Push it again, you turn the traction control back on. Can't get more simple than that. It's also got a very basic engine. It's just 2 valves per cylinder, as all LS motors are. But it's not unsophisticated at all. It's got an aluminum block. It's got aluminum heads. It's a lightweight engine. And for its size and overall dimensions, it actually makes a lot of power. You know, when you look at like the European supercars or even Italian supercars, you know, they've got 4 valves per cylinder, and they've got crazy heads that flow a ridiculous amount of air, and that's all well and good until something goes wrong with it. Because especially if you drive in a performance-oriented way, eventually something is going to go wrong with your car. And if it costs more than the cost of the car to fix it, then it's a failure, and it's not worth it. Whereas something like this, yes, okay, the engines are a little bit pricey, but the idea that it's ever going to catastrophically failure and you need a new engine is pretty remote. It's just simple, basic engineering, and it's a bit raw, I will admit, but at the same time, it's a lot of fun, and it's simple, and it's honest, and it is just, I mean, anytime. It is just that much fun. If you're a real race or driver like me, you are a fan of double declutching to go down through the gears. I know cars these days have much better synchros in them than they originally did, and you can just put the gear lever in a gear and with your foot down on the clutch, and it will go into the gear without grinding or anything. But you know, I'm more old school in my ways. I like to give it a little bit and let the synchros all rev match, and then let it then downshift. I'm just old school that way. Probably why my screen name is Old School GP. And it's very comfortable. I mean, this is probably one of the most comfortable seats I've ever sat in, be it a house or a hotel or even any other car. It is just a fantastically comfortable seat, and that's the one thing that was very much praised by just about everybody who drove this car and tested it for some sort of magazine or something. It's just how comfortable this car is. When I bought this car, actually, I bought it in New Jersey and I drove it home, and it was a 1,000-mile trip. And for the past couple of years, I had owned a Volkswagen and then my Grand Prix. And in both of those cars, I couldn't drive them more than an hour and a half or 2 hours. My legs would start to cramp up. They'd start to ache. I'd have to squirm all around to try and find a way to get comfortable. I couldn't drive those cars long distances. I have to get out. I have to stop at a wayside. I have to stretch or something. Whereas this, I got in it, and I went across New Jersey, all of Pennsylvania, and halfway across Ohio. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was comfortable and awake and alert, and I was sitting there thinking, you know, if I just kept driving, I could be home by 9 a.m. I honestly entertained that idea. That's how comfortable it was. But, I mean, better common sense kicked in and said, no, you know, you've been driving for 10 hours, you really should stop. And I did. But it is just one of those cars that you can just drive infinite expanses and just enjoy.